power, deception, and an unstoppable ego. This is the story of a man who believed he was untouchable, only to learn that justice bows to no one. The courtroom hummed with tension, an undercurrent of whispers rippling through the packed gallery. Journalists sat poised with their pens ready, victims clenched their fists in quiet anticipation, and onlookers shifted in their seats, drawn to the spectacle like moths to a flame. Then, the man of the hour arrived. Dorian Langford strode through the doors as if he were walking onto the red carpet, rather than stepping into a room where his fate would be decided. He exuded an air of unshakable confidence, his custom-tailored navy blue suit hugging his broad frame, his watch, a timepiece worth more than most people's homes, glinting under the harsh lights. A smirk played at the corners of his lips as if he found the entire ordeal amusing. His name had dominated headlines for months. The financial mogul who had promised prosperity but delivered ruin. The man who had convinced hardworking families, retirees, and hopeful entrepreneurs to invest their life savings in ventures that, as the evidence now showed, had been built on nothing but lies. Yet, even with the weight of countless accusations against him, Dorian didn't look like a man worried about consequences. He walked to the defense table as if it were a seat of honor, greeting his high-priced legal team with a self-assured nod before casually taking his place. But his composure was met with an opposing force. Judge Evelyn Carter. She entered the courtroom with an air of quiet authority, her black robe flowing behind her as she stepped up to the bench. She had presided over high-profile cases before, earning a reputation for her unyielding stance on justice and her intolerance for theatrics. The kind of judge that even the most powerful feared facing. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Carter," the bailiff announced. The room stood, all except Dorian Langford. A hush fell over the courtroom, the collective breath of those present held in stunned silence. Dorian, instead of acknowledging the court's authority, casually flipped through the pages of a legal pad, appearing bored. His attorney leaned in, whispering something urgent. But with a mere flick of his wrist, Dorian dismissed him. Judge Carter's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She settled into her seat, her gaze locking onto him. "You may be seated," she said evenly. As the crowd lowered themselves back into their seats, an unspoken understanding passed through the room. This trial would not go as Dorian expected. For years, Langford had lived above the rules, weaving a web of deceit so complex that even financial experts had been fooled. He had charmed investors into believing in a dream that never existed, siphoning their money into his own luxurious lifestyle. Private jets, sprawling estates, exclusive parties with the world's elite. He had it all, funded by the very people now sitting in the gallery, their lives in ruins. When the truth unraveled, the damage was catastrophic. Retirees found themselves destitute. Parents lost the ability to send their children to college. Small business owners were forced to close their doors. The ripple effect was immeasurable. Yet through it all, Dorian had maintained his innocence, scoffing at accusations and dismissing them as attempts to tear down a successful man. "This is a witch hunt," he had told reporters outside his estate when the charges were first announced. "I've done nothing wrong." But the evidence told a different story. Leaked emails, falsified documents, offshore accounts, all pointing to an elaborate fraud that had left hundreds in financial ruin. Still, Dorian believed himself untouchable. His legal team, the best money could buy, had delayed the trial for months, filing motion after motion in a desperate bid to stall proceedings. They painted him as a visionary entrepreneur, a scapegoat for an unstable economy, a victim of jealous regulators. But no legal maneuvering could erase the pain of those who had trusted him. In the front row sat Olivia Ramirez, a mother of three who had lost her home after investing her savings with Langford. Her youngest son had been forced to drop out of school. Next to her sat Thomas Briggs, a retired firefighter who had spent decades saving for a comfortable retirement, only to end up living out of his car. Their stories, and those of many others, would soon be told. As the prosecution laid out its case, the weight of Langford's crimes became undeniable. Witnesses took the stand one by one, each testimony another brick in the fortress of evidence surrounding him. Olivia's voice trembled as she recounted the moment she realized her life savings were gone. "I begged them not to take my house," she said, her hands trembling. "But they didn't care. My kids and I slept in our car for weeks." Thomas's words carried the fire of betrayal. "I spent my life running into burning buildings to save strangers," he said. "And this man, he burned everything I had with the stroke of a pen." Yet, through it all, Dorian Langford remained unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, whispered to his lawyer, checked his watch. At times, he even smirked. To him, these were just stories, irrelevant noise that wouldn't change what he saw as an inevitable outcome in his favor. The headlines captured his arrogance, the sheer lack of remorse, the blatant disregard he had for the suffering of his victims. Public opinion turned viciously against him. But as far as Dorian was concerned, public opinion didn't dictate the law. He still had faith that his wealth and influence would shield him. But there was one thing Dorian Langford had not accounted for. Judge Evelyn Carter was not a woman easily swayed. As the trial continued, the walls of Dorian's illusion of control began to crack. He still believed he was playing a game, that his money would bend the system in his favor. But with each passing day, that belief was tested. The evidence mounted. The testimonies pierced through his facade. And Judge Carter? She watched, silent but calculating, waiting for the moment when the reality of his situation would finally sink in. The trial was far from over, but one thing was certain. Dorian Langford was about to learn that not even the richest man in the room can buy his way out of the truth. As the trial continued, Victor Langley's arrogance only grew. He interrupted witnesses with sarcastic chuckles, rolled his eyes during cross-examinations, and whispered loudly to his lawyer during key moments. The audience watched in disbelief as he treated the courtroom like his personal stage. Then came the day of Isabel Contreras' testimony. She stepped up to the stand, clutching a folded piece of paper in trembling hands. Her voice was shaky as she began, but her words carried the weight of her pain. "I trusted him," she said, looking directly at Victor. "I trusted him with everything I had, and he destroyed my family's future." Victor didn't even look at her. He leaned back in his chair, casually scrolling through his phone. "Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted, pointing toward Victor. "The defendant is clearly not paying attention to the witness." All eyes turned to Judge Evelyn Carter. Her face was impassive, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. "Mr. Langley," she said, her voice measured, "put your phone away. Now." Victor glanced up, unfazed. "I was just checking something important," he said, holding up the device as if to prove his point. The judge's tone hardened. "I said now." For a moment, it seemed like he might argue, but then, reluctantly, he set the phone down. The tension in the room was palpable, but the damage was already done. Isabel's testimony continued, but her voice carried a tremor of disbelief, as though she couldn't fathom the lack of basic human decency. By the end of her statement, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except for Victor's. The prosecution rested its case a week later, leaving the defense to make their move. Victor's lawyer tried everything, discrediting witnesses, twisting the narrative, even painting Victor as a victim of overzealous prosecutors. But the cracks were too big to cover. Through it all, Judge Carter maintained her composure. She rarely spoke, but her presence loomed over the room like a steady, unwavering force. But it was clear to everyone watching that her patience with Victor's antics was wearing thin. The trial had reached its final day. The air in the courtroom was electric, the anticipation almost unbearable. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised and cameras ready. The gallery was packed with victims, their faces a mix of anger and hope. All eyes were on Judge Evelyn Carter as she prepared to deliver the sentence. Victor Langley sat at the defense table, his posture as relaxed as ever. He even had the audacity to flash a small grin to the cameras as they captured his every move. He didn't look like a man about to face judgment. He looked like a man convinced he'd already won. When Judge Carter finally spoke, the room fell silent. "Mr. Langley," she began, her voice steady and deliberate, "you have been found guilty on all counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the testimonies of your victims paint a clear picture of your actions. You manipulated, exploited, and destroyed the lives of countless people, all for personal gain." Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The judge continued, "Throughout this trial, you have shown a blatant lack of remorse. Your behavior in this courtroom has been nothing short of disgraceful. You have insulted your victims, disregarded this court's authority, and treated these proceedings as if they were beneath you." The crowd murmured in agreement. Isabel Contreras, sitting in the front row, clasped her hands tightly, her knuckles white. Judge Carter's tone shifted, becoming colder. "Justice, Mr. Langley, is not about wealth, power, or privilege. It is about accountability, and today you will face the consequences of your actions." The room was so quiet, you could hear the faint rustling of paper. Victor's smirk faltered for the first time as he straightened in his chair. "Therefore," the judge declared, "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Victor's face froze, the blood draining from his cheeks. 25 years? He'd been expecting a slap on the wrist, maybe a few months in a cushy facility, but this was unheard of for someone of his stature. Judge Carter wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate liquidation of your assets to repay the victims of your crimes. Every dollar you stole will be returned to the families you devastated." The courtroom broke into stunned murmurs. Isabel Contreras pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Liam Reynolds leaned back in his seat, his eyes wide with disbelief. Victor shot up from his chair, his face red with anger. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice echoing in the room. "I'm Victor Langley. You can't treat me like some common criminal." Judge Carter's gavel slammed down, her expression unyielding. "Mr. Langley, sit down." But Victor wasn't finished. "This is a joke. I'll appeal this. I'll have your career ruined, Judge." The bailiffs moved closer, ready to intervene. Judge Carter remained calm, her voice cutting through his outburst like a knife. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Langley, and you will show respect. Bailiffs, escort the defendant out." As he was led away, Victor continued to protest, his voice growing fainter with each step. The courtroom erupted into applause, something that rarely happened but felt entirely appropriate in the moment. Judge Carter turned to the audience, her expression softening just slightly. "Justice has been served," she said. "Let this be a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." But as the courtroom emptied and the cameras outside began flashing, one question lingered in everyone's minds. Would this sentence be enough to truly change a man like Victor Langley? The courtroom was nearly empty now, save for a few lingering reporters and victims gathering their belongings. The buzz of excitement still hung in the air. But for those directly affected by Victor Langley's crimes, the emotions were more complex. Isabel Contreras stood by the courthouse steps, clutching her purse tightly. A reporter approached her with a microphone. "How do you feel after today's verdict?" Isabel hesitated, then said, "I feel relieved. But the truth is, no sentence will erase the damage he caused. My kids and I are still rebuilding, but at least now we have hope." Nearby, Liam Reynolds was speaking with a friend. "It's not just about the years he's getting," he said, shaking his head. "It's about the message. People like him think they're untouchable. Today proves they're not." Inside her chambers, Judge Evelyn Carter sat quietly, staring out the window at the commotion below. She didn't feel triumph or victory, just a steady resolve. Her role wasn't about personal satisfaction. It was about ensuring fairness, about reminding everyone that the scales of justice could balance even against the weight of wealth and privilege. Victor Langley's name would continue to make headlines for a while, but for the people he had wronged, the chapter was finally closing. The financial restitution would help many of them start over, but the scars he left behind would take longer to heal. As the weeks passed, the story sparked conversations across the country. It became a rallying cry for accountability, for holding those in power to the same standards as everyone else. People shared their own stories of injustice, drawing strength from the verdict. But perhaps the most powerful moment came from Isabel's youngest daughter, Camila, who wrote a letter to Judge Carter that was later published in a local newspaper. "Thank you for standing up for my family," it read. "Thank you for showing us that people like Victor Langley can't get away with hurting people like us. You didn't just give us justice, you gave us a second chance." The story of Victor Langley's trial was more than just a courtroom drama. It was a reminder of the resilience of ordinary people, the importance of integrity, and the belief that justice can and should prevail, no matter the odds.